Welcome back, wife.
Hubs.
What's new?
A lot.
I always love asking that because we just spin in the same four walls all day long.
So you know everything that's new?
We know everything we have nothing new. Well, we're in the process of packing, getting ready to move.
Mm-hmm. Kids are out of school.
So we're swimming and the kids are walking the dogs around on leashes and basically torturing the animals. And Nikki's been watching The Wild Kingdom, that is our backyard, and our cat slaughtering all of the baby birds in the backyard.
We have this wonderful nest of a robin nest up in the tree, and I've been watching the parents come and feed the babies, and then yesterday morning there were no parents, and it was silent, and I think our cat slayed the whole family.
The cat's been eyeballing this thing for probably a week, and I think he just waited for the baby birds to get fat enough to make it worth his while to climb the tree. So
those ones I was particularly attached to because I was watching them every day in the morning.
Well, clearly the cat was pretty attached to them also.
All right, let's jump in on our questions. Okay, let's see. Our first question this week is from Steve. He says he keeps stuffing up and it's driving me crazy. Hi, Rob. I don't want to take too much of your time, but going keto for me has found me doing exactly what I feared I could do. I've been paleo for 5 or 6 years, and so is my wife. We have no kids at home, so grains and junky carbs are not an issue or even a temptation. I'm in the middle of doing the keto masterclass, which I'm savoring because I've been making some mistakes. 50 years old, work out regularly, doing either mixed kettlebell workouts or I do weight and resistance training. I like to do whole body workouts 3 times a week and can mix in some cardio in between. I've kept fit most of my life, and my goal is, as I age, to stay lean and keep mobile. Pretty simple. We live in Perth in Western Australia, so we have great weather and lots of sun. I work as a gardener in a private school, a job I love doing as I'm outside and moving all day. Not as hard as some sort of construction worker, but that can happen on any given day, just not every day. Coming from eating paleo, the transition for me has been pretty easy. As I went low carb and increased the fat I was eating, my wife liked the sound of it, so she hopped on board. She's doing great, and in fact, better than me. We aren't really that worried about measuring ketones at this stage. It has been more about getting the diet right. But my issue is I love the food. For some reason, it has made me hungrier. Stocking our fridge and cupboards, I made sure that we had all we needed, and I wanted to see what I liked to eat also. So I've blown it on all sorts of things. I've had days where I ate too much thickened cream. One tub has 800 calories, and it is so easy to eat. I've blown it on nut butter and blown it on cheese. I can't believe it. At first, it was wrapping my head around the fat content, but I think I get it now. But I have put on body fat, which is so annoying. It's not a train wreck, but I feel like I'm in a rut and it's hard to get out. I don't want to quit because I can see I have felt the benefits. It's just with the fat content and my physiology, there seems to be no room for error. I listened to your podcast, and since listening, I've gone to the Keto Gains website and worked out my macros. I was still tracking somewhat, but some days I may have blown it by 500 or 600 calories. I've come so close to quitting, as for me, it seems to have been an easy way to get fat rather than leaner. I'm not sure that you can help me, and I'm not sure what else I could tell you. Diet-wise, I have intermittent fasted for 3 or more years with differing protocols. Doing 16 to 20 hours is pretty comfortable. I work out in the mornings, and I often don't eat until lunch or when I get home from work. My diet hasn't changed too much, except I've eaten cream, which I'm now over, adding more fat to my meals, cooking in butter, eating nuts, and doing other keto-style things. Apart from that, my diet is still pretty normal. I love veggies. I have for years done a version of Mark Sisson's big-ass salad, which would be my daily staple. Evening veggies could be broccoli with Brussels sprouts, maybe some kale and mushrooms. Also, we do milk, kefir, but I try to keep that to a minimum. If you have any suggestions, that would be great. Are there others that have had this sort of issue where going keto has made them fatter? Really enjoy your podcast, and thanks for all of the really useful info that you've put out. I've also read your books. Best regards, Steve.
You know, it's funny, when we were going through this, when I saw stuffing it up, I thought it was going to be a sinus issue, but so do you have any thoughts on this, like shooting from the hip?
Yeah, the first thing is he didn't mention protein at all, and it seems pretty focused on the fat, which, as you talk about in the Keto Masterclass, like fat is a lever. Protein is first because that tackles it's the most satiating macronutrient, and he says he's hungry, so I'm wondering if he's not getting enough protein.
Right. That's kind of my first thought as well, the whole protein leverage hypothesis. And there's a lot of, this is where it gets so it's so hard to unpack this stuff because a lot of people, if they come from a kind of traditional Western diet, they shift to low carb or even paleo, but let's just say low carb. And instead of being on these carb roller coasters all the time, you just get this like nice, even energy, even blood glucose levels, whether it's ketone fueled or not. It's just like you're not on the ups and downs. And generally they notice that they're not as hungry. But I think that can kind of give way over time to being low protein. And again, with that whole protein leverage hypothesis idea, whether you eat low carb or low fat, if you eat adequate protein, you're probably going to be pretty good, you know, all other things being equal. But if you're skinny on the protein, then your body is going to stimulate hunger and you're going to tend to eat more food. And there is kind of a reality that one of the dangers of kind of keto eating is that the bulk of the food is pretty calorically dense. You know, I mean, you could go pretty crazy on plain sweet potatoes or something like that, you know, and I mean, just the calorie density is not anything.
Extra wedge of cheese, depending on how you measure a wedge.
Right, yeah, wedge. Yeah.
Is a significant number
Could
of
be
calories.
a significant chunk of calories. So the protein would definitely be a thought. An additional thought, he seems to be kicking the bulk of his calories to later in the day. So I would, following a lot of Bill Lagakos's work and things that we're learning around time-restricted eating, I would try shifting more of the calories earlier in the day. All things being equal, it seems like people generally do better with that. And then one final piece is thinking about your electrolyte intake, in particular sodium. So Tyler and Louise shot me an interesting paper the other day. So there's a lot of folklore in the keto world, which I kind of alluded to, that we get this kind of appetite suppressing effect while in ketosis and while fasting and stuff like that. And there's definitely truth to that. But when ketone salts have been studied kind of head to head with ketone esters, it's interesting that esters produce higher levels of blood ketones, but they do not have an appetite blunting effect, not the way that ketone salts do. Now, this is totally speculative, but one of the key features of ketone salts is they have a shitload of salt in them. And we've often kind of joked that, you know, when people are like, man, I feel great using ketone salts, it's because they're actually getting a decent whack of sodium in particular, in addition to the other electrolytes. So I would really be fastidious on protein, and then also make sure that you get at least that 5 grams per day of sodium specifically.
Especially because you're in a warm climate, you're outside all the time,
Yeah, so those are some biggies in that. So I guess the 3 are be on point with protein, make sure that you're getting your electrolytes addressed, and then finally try shifting more of the calories earlier in the day versus this later in the day eating schedule.
Okay. So Steve, do all that and then report back.
Ping back and let us know. Yep.
Okay. So our next question is from Rory. What's up with fiber in kids? Rory says, as part of restoring my own gut health, I've used prebiotic fibers in various doses based somewhat on Grace Liu's advice, and I'm curious if and when supplemental fiber would be beneficial for my daughter. Again, assuming that she started off at a disadvantage because of the antibiotics, it seems to follow logically that prebiotic fiber would help her gut bacteria develop and increase her overall health and resilience. Is that actually logical? Are there any cautions? Is there a certain dose that's age appropriate, or do I just slowly increase until she has digestive upset? Should I mix fibers in order to feed a variety of bacteria, or are there certain fibers that are optimal for a young gut? I.e., what would a cave baby be most likely to eat or chew on for fun?
Man, that's a lot going on there. So I think I've mentioned the Sonnenberg lab a couple of times. I got to speak with Erica Sonnenberg at the event that Akil Palanisamy puts on each year with UCSF. And what was interesting, she mentioned that they've done so many different things, but just consuming fermented food. This was one of the studies. Folks were consuming fermented food, and they looked at their gut microbiome profile, the diversity, and the various ratios before and then during and then after the intervention of adding fermented food like kimchi and sauerkraut and stuff like that. What was interesting is that the gut diversity increased while consuming the fermented food, but it wasn't any of the bacteria that were part of the fermented food. And it's been understood for a long time, or at least somewhat understood, that bacteria doesn't necessarily play a role in populating the gut, at least not long term, but it seems to tune the immune response and perhaps creates an environment that's more amenable for other organisms to occupy the space. So that's an interesting thing. It seems a little bit more holistic and kind of leaves all the information processing up to the gut and the ecology of the gut, instead of like trying to, have this notion that we're going to pinpoint, fix anything that's going on there. We've talked about this in previous episodes. The supplementation with prebiotic fibers, it seems to be a little bit of a mixed bag. Some people do great with it. Some people do terribly. The point about having a really diverse mixture, I think, makes a lot of sense. Garden of Life, like Dr. Perlmutter's prebiotic fiber, is a really nice spectrum. It has acacia in it and like lemon and orange peel pulp, and it just has like 20 different things in it. So something like that could potentially be something that you add to maybe like some applesauce or something like that. I would probably keep the doses a little on the smaller side. I don't know that I would really want to run like a GI, pressure test on that, but those are the things that I would noodle on with all that stuff. And if you're doing white potatoes, cassava, white rice, like going through the whole process of like cooking it, chilling it, improving the resistant starch profile, I think that stuff makes sense. But I would be a little bit careful doing outright supplementation beyond that. Do you have any additional thoughts?
Nothing.
Okay, yeah. But our kids love both kimchi and sauerkraut. They eat it. We forget to put it, if we put it out, they will eat it. We just sometimes in putting out the meal forget to, but most kids will gravitate towards that pretty well. So I think that's kind of a nice simple baseline that you can have. That
just get the mild one.
Yeah, just get the mild one. Yeah. Every once in a while I mess up and get the red lid, and even though Sagan has a pretty spicy palate, it's a little bit much. Yeah.
Alrighty, let's see. Our next question is from Mads. Tips for increasing testosterone. Hey Rob, in a previous Q&A you talked about how muscle gain and hypertrophy is caused by calorie surplus and progressive overload. You also mentioned that gaining muscle is, without a doubt, easier if you have high testosterone. Calorie surplus and progressive overload is easy, but how do I increase my testosterone? You mentioned that there are a number of different tactics that you can use. My testosterone is not low, but it's definitely not high either. I'm 27 and my testosterone is 640 nanograms per deciliter, and my free testosterone is 16.36.
Man, this is a good question. So a young guy,
testosterone is lower than my dad's.
Yeah, who's 70.
70.
Yeah, which he's just kind of a stud. So you're
well, no, but I mean also because I know you've talked before about how our parents and grandparents' generation as a baseline had higher testosterone than
Kurt Parsley has some numbers that he quotes that my grandparents' generation appeared, both men and women appeared to have testosterone levels about 3 times on average what we're seeing today. So yeah, I mean it's probably not optimal from a recovery standpoint. This is the thing again, we don't really know why this is changing. Is it xenoestrogens? Is it a change in the gut microbiome? Is it all of these things? The stuff that can definitely help, usually something that looks kind of akin to a lower carb diet, tends to help because people lose body fat. If we're carrying, it's interesting on the testosterone story, specifically with men, being super lean is antagonistic towards testosterone. So once you get below about 10, maybe 8% as a baseline, your testosterone will tend to start dropping because of some stress response issues. Some people run leaner and high testosterone, but this is again, kind of generalization. But then once you start cresting up above maybe about 14, 15% body fat, you have enough fat mass which contains an enzyme called aromatase, which can convert the testosterone into estrogen. And the interesting kind of downward spiral with that is the brain doesn't sense testosterone levels, it senses estrogen levels. So if estrogen levels are high, the brain says, oh, we're good with testosterone. I don't need to stimulate luteinizing hormone and, ping the Leydig cells to release the precursors and cofactors involved with the whole testosterone production cascade. So someone who is overweight will have low testosterone, which tends to feed into overweight, which then elevates their estrogen levels, which suppresses testosterone production at the brain. And then even if they go and get some sort of testosterone replacement therapy, if the doctor is ham-handed with this, they just give them a big, huge dose of testosterone, which further suppresses endogenous testosterone production. So with someone like this, some things like zinc citrate have been shown to be pretty effective, about 50 milligrams per day. You have to be careful with doing that consistently because it can deplete your copper levels.
So when you say careful doing it consistently, like once a week, every other day?
You could do it maybe like 4 or 5 days on and then take 4 or 5 days off, or you could use a supplement like Jarrow's zinc citrate, which comes with copper, like 5 milligrams copper. So that's something to do, is to make sure that you're supplementing with that. If your body fat levels are north of about 14, 15, like if they're in there, then I would try to do some things to get leaner and see if that improves testosterone levels. Sleep is going to be a huge factor. So what time are you going to bed? What time are you waking up? What's the sleep quality?
Getting in
are
bed
you in a completely black room?
Midnight.
Earlier is better. Yeah.
As many hours of sleep before midnight as possible.
Yeah, ideally, which is harder in the summer months, depending on where you are and what latitude you're at. But improving sleep, improving body composition, those are the places that I would look first. And I would really dig into the diet and lifestyle features first and figure out what, if any, bump you can get from that. And only then, if we aren't seeing favorable changes, do we start working with a knowledgeable functional medicine doctor, like anti-aging doctor, and starting with things like Clomid and some mild aromatase inhibitors and stuff like that to try to goose endogenous production first. Like particularly someone that's 27, like you do not want this person getting into a testosterone replacement therapy scenario. I guess one other question is for Mads, has he ever suffered a significant traumatic brain injury? And sometimes you may not be aware of that, but like if you played youth football, if you played hockey, if you fell off of a trampoline or, so this could be something too that is part of the sleep piece. If sleep seems to be pretty good, but everything isn't really kicking over, then there can be some sleep studies, there could be some brain imaging and some testing to look at what's going on between the pituitary and the other elements of this story. So that's kind of getting in another layer, and it's going to be a while, but we will have some material that's going to really help people unpack this stuff in a completely systematic process, because there's so much shitty information on this and it's so confusing and you need a lot of nuance. There is never a one-size-fits-all approach on this, other than maybe sleep better. Like that one. That's about the only one that I would be, that's going to benefit virtually everybody. But occasionally you have these outliers of people who have a particular type of depression or mania, and they actually benefit from certain periods of sleep deprivation. So again, there's an exception to fucking everything. This is why when people just paint everything with these broad brushstrokes, like there's just seemingly an exception to everything. So yeah, I know that I was kind of all over the map on that, but it's a lot of stuff. And we'll be doing some work with Kirk Parsley in the future to get some materials so that people can really navigate this story in an effective way.
All right. Let's see, our next question is on sex hormone binding globulin elevated on keto carnivore. And this is from Ian, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Ian says, since switching to keto, I've noticed an increase in sex hormone binding globulin levels, which brings down my free testosterone. So total testosterone has stayed high normal, but was wondering how functional it is with the free portion bound up. DHEA is a bit low too. I feel great all in all, but was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and so the previous question, I should have mentioned the sex hormone binding globulin story as well. It's interesting, generally when insulin levels go down on a relative basis, we tend to see sex hormone binding globulin go up. What's unclear about that is it's somewhat similar to thyroid, specifically T3, decreasing on low carb because you need more thyroid hormone to process carbohydrate. If you're eating fewer carbohydrates, thyroid decreases, but is that clinically significant? And we just don't really know. Another piece of this whole kind of androgen story, and again, this is true whether you're male or female, is that you may have a particular level of a hormone that may look kind of low, but you may have particularly high receptor site density or receptor site affinity. So a little bit of the hormone goes a long way. The flip side is that you could have quite high hormone levels and low receptor site density and or affinity. And so you're still not getting into, an effective kind of story. And I'm not entirely sure how to fully unpack that. Doing some sort of full body radioimmunoassay to determine what your receptor site density is. And receptor sites change moment by moment too. They come online and offline all the time. So yeah, I mean, I guess the best answer that I have with that is that we could play around with titrating in more carbs. Start with like 50 additional grams of carbs a day, stick it in the post-workout window. And do you feel better? For both men and women, do you experience better libido? For men, do you wake up with morning wood and stuff like that? Whereas perhaps previously you did not. If we see those things improve, then we might make a case that the insulin and levels were suppressed beyond what may be beneficial. And so we may have been getting an unfavorable elevation in sex hormone binding protein or globulin, whatever they're calling it these days. So those are some things to play with on this. But again, it's a little bit, these are the last 10% things for most people that we have to devote some time to unpack.
Okay. Let's see. Our final question this week is on chicharrones.
Cha-cha-cha.
From Isaac. Hey, Rob. Chicharrones, pork rinds, are they a healthy snack? I've heard you indirectly mention them on the podcast some time ago, but I wasn't able to infer whether your opinion is favorable or cautionary. I'm an ultra runner, and during peak training season, we'll spend about 20 hours per week running. In the bad old days, I would top off my calories with a gigantic bowl of cold cereal in the evening or an enormous serving of lentils and rice. But then I got woke, started monitoring my blood sugar, and started looking for low-carb options to fuel. I'm already having 2 salads each day, huge amounts of veggies, and as much meat as I can stomach. So I'm just looking for some calories to fuel the movement. So are pork rinds okay? I avoid the flavored variety. The bags I buy just say fried pork skin on the ingredients list, and I dip them in sour cream. The best part is how easy it is to get an extra 1,000 calories, and the flavor. Am I headed towards clogged arteries? Or are pork rinds actually healthy in the way that bacon is healthy? Thanks. Love the show, Isaac. He says, after submitting my question about whether pork rinds are an acceptable snack, I realized that Rob's answer might be we'd need to see your lab work. So then he has his cholesterol.
Oh, that's doing some diligence. We don't have an LDL. Oh, do we? No, we have lipoprotein, ApoB. He does. LDL particle is 1149. That looks phenomenal. Quick triglyceride HDL ratio looks great. See, reactive protein is tiny. Okay, cool. And those numbers we'll put in the show notes. So this is one of these funny things. So like Rhonda Patrick, who I think is great, but like pork rinds have been one of the things that she's just like gone after. She's like, oh, it's just so unhealthy. There's no nutritional value there. Which, I mean, there's not a lot of vitamins. There's probably not a lot of minerals particularly, but it is a really interesting source of collagen. And when you're in this kind of lower carb, unprocessed food world, there's not much that's crunchy. Like, you'll grab a piece of ice just to be like, oh man, I want some sort of a crunch. Like, we'll do some jicama thin sliced every once in a while, but you just kind of, you miss that crunch. And chicharrones are phenomenal for that. Typically, they're cooked in pork fat. I guess you could make the case that maybe some of that stuff is producing some oxidized cholesterol. But I was just reading some stuff recently that people in ketosis, their liver preferentially identifies lipoproteins with oxidized cholesterol and removes them from the system. So it's kind of an interesting story where even though cholesterol levels, possibly even lipoprotein levels, may go up under a ketogenic or low carb diet, your body also seems to be more savvy about removing the offending particles that appear to be the most problematic. So it's kind of like, is that a wash? Is it a net win, a net loss? With the option of always modifying my position in the future, I would say in general, I can't really see pork rinds in the context of like a keto, carnivore type diet being the least bit problematic. The cool thing here is that Isaac has done the diligence of doing some good blood work that actually answers some questions, even just glancing at it. It's kind of like, okay, we're pretty good to go. We don't have any type of wacky discordance. We don't have hidden insulin resistance. There's a few other things we could take a peek at if we wanted to, but from reading between the lines, it sounds like he's looking, feeling, performing well, but is just kind of curious about like, hey, is this one thing that I'm throwing down the pie hole gonna crush me? So I would just repeat this blood work probably once a year or something like that to just use as a baseline. Maybe at some point, additionally, doing a coronary calcium, just so you've got that in your back pocket, and we can use that again as a baseline. A CIMT can be handy also, but it takes a very skilled practitioner to do the CIMT well. So those are a little bit of a mixed bag, and they're a little more variable than the coronary calcium. But beyond that, it seems good. And I will make a plug for the Epic pork rinds. Yep. They have a barbecue flavor, a sea salt and vinegar, and salt and pepper.
Really good.
Yeah, and the barbecue one, like the kids. It literally can devolve.
They have a baked one too.
Yeah, they do have a baked one, which I like less, honestly. I like the ones that are fried in pork fat. But either one of the flavors, but mainly the barbecue flavor, will provoke the girls into a fist fight practically as they get down to the bottom of the bag, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but they're good. They're tasty.
Too.
The dog definitely likes them too.
The bag comes out and he hears it and he's like right there sitting, pleading.
So Isaac, good question, and good on you for doing some diligence on your blood work. It's incredibly frustrating when people spend time and money to go get an assessment that answers nothing. And this is another area that we're going to be dipping our toes into to help people make better decisions around the lab work that they're choosing, why they're choosing it. So keep your eyes open for that too. And making sense of it. Yeah, because I literally 90% of the time, 95% of the time, people do blood work and they're more confused by what is ordered than otherwise, and it's because it's just not enough to really make a definitive call in general.
All right, that was our last question for the week. Thanks, everyone. As usual, if you have questions, you can submit those at robbwolf.com on the contact page. What else?
Most of my online activity currently is over at Instagram at DasRobbWolf.
DasRobbWolf.
That's it. So thanks for the awesome questions. Yeah. You guys are fantastic. And
we'll be back next week.
We'll be back next week. We may be a little bit hit and miss between now and August, mid-August, because we're going to be moving and stuff like that. We're going to try to bank some of these so that we stay ahead of stuff. It's possible that life may just grab us by the short hair, so and demand that doesn't happen. But we will do our best to stay on top of this. Yep.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.